Hey, I am Max, one of the co-founders of GraphCDN, and I'm excited to kick off our team interviews and show you a little bit of the behind the scenes and introduce you to some of the great people that we get to work with here every day. My first guest is Odio, our head of operations of people. She brings a ton of Silicon Valley startup experience with her and has helped scale many different startups. And she was actually one of the very first people we brought on board, and I'm super excited that I get to talk to her today. Sue, I know that you have quite a bit of experience in startups. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in the past and the experience you've had? Sue, I would love to hear more about where you started. Where did all of this startup thing begin for you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I'll answer it from a different angle. So for me, it all started a long time ago because as an adult, I was diagnosed with ADD. And having ADD diagnosis was a very curious journey for me because it's not something that I expected, but it was something that came into my life. And it explains so much of my behavior. And what it did for me was it allowed me to name something. And by naming it, it gives you power over it and you can choose your journey. And so I decided to choose my journey. And one of the things that really became apparent to me was that as a society and as a professional adult society, there are many attributes of having ADD, the characteristics that are pretty classic, that is looked upon as a weakness. And so I took it upon myself to figure out, okay, how can I convert this into a strength and not a weakness? And what are the attributes? And so one of the things that impacts me with my ADD is that things that are interesting can grab me very quickly, and I can have fleeting moments of attention. And so when you can't pay attention and you look at something like, oh, look at that butterfly, oh, there's a bird, what's going on? So when you do something like that in the professional world, it's not always deemed as a positive thing. But what I've learned is that it actually empowers me to context switch. I can context switch what I've learned probably at a faster rate and with more clarity than other folks without ADD or without my kind of ADD. So I realized that I need situations where I need to context switch, and then figuring out where I can do that and how I can apply it in a really meaningful way that aligns with my own values. That was the journey that kicked me off into the wonderful world of startups. Because if there's any environment where you have to context switch, and when you're in a situation where tons of things are thrown at you, it's a startup. So I've learned to convert a lot of my what are society perceived to be weaknesses and convert them into strengths in the startup world. A lesser known component about ADD is that it is there's an element of hyperfocus. So some folks have this ability to hyperfocus on something. So when something grabs our attention, it's like I can sit at a desk for hours. I won't notice the sun setting. I won't notice that I'm hungry. I won't notice other people walking in and out of the room. And I can do that. And that's also a beautiful gift because when you're company building, when you are building anything, when you have that intense, deep work, you have a different output than when you have fleeting moments of attention, or even if it's siloed into different hours. So that's really what kicked me off into the wonderful world of startups so long ago.
I love that. I miss that feeling of hyperfocus. In the programming world, people often call that flow, right? And they say, I got really into the flow today. And I miss that feeling now that I'm not coding as much anymore. I don't get that as much anymore. I used to get that every day, and now I get it much less because I context switch, and I don't have the ability to context switch as quickly as you do. I'm curious if you could even describe a typical day. What do you do as the head of operations and people at GraphCDN? Is there even such a thing as a typical day?
Yeah, I was actually going to say just that. I don't think there is a typical day at this early stage. And, the thing about titles early of folks who are especially of leadership at startups early on, it's very misleading. You do whatever it takes. You put on every hat is that a hat on the floor? Let me put that one on today. So there isn't a typical day, but there is focus. And for me, the most important thing about startups is finding a product that people can believe in and building a place where people can belong. And I come in as a partner to the founders. And oftentimes the skill set of the founders, especially in Silicon Valley and tech, they are more technical, their product background, their engineering background. And so the gap that is left is often on the non-technical side of things. And so I come in as the strategic thought and business partner to technical founders to build out the foundation of an organization. So I have focus, but on a typical day, I mean, it could vary from doing legal to finance, financial modeling, doing people, benefits, onboarding, offboarding. There's just so many different things that we could be doing. But the way I view the work that I do is that I'm playing strategic chess and multiple games of checkers on the same board at the same time. Because everything that it's, I mean, you can visualize it, right? Because of the board. And it's like you have to play the strategic chess, because everything that we do now, you're laying the foundation, and you have to think towards how is this going to impact the future? What are the future risks that we can mitigate now? And some you can prevent altogether. And all at the same time, you have to roll up your sleeves and move individual components. You have to move things forward. And that's what the checkers are. It's that just the rote movement of like, let's move these things forward. Let's get to the other side. And then all at the same time, playing the strategic chess.
I can honestly say that you've elevated the company to a whole new level since you joined, because we knew from the get-go that to us as founders, it's really important to focus on the people, because ultimately if we can hire the best people and they put them to work effectively and they are in an environment where they can do their best work and they want to do their best work, then we have a much higher chance of being successful. And I think you've really helped us lay the right foundations, like you said, and really put the right building blocks into place at the right times so that we can really build an organization that's effective. Now, with all of these things you're doing, how do you prioritize? There must be a million things that are important at any given moment to do. How do you figure out of all of those million things, what is the most next important strategic or tactical milestone to achieve?
Yeah, I believe that prioritization is a skill. I think that people think it's innate, but I strongly believe that it's a skill, and it's something that you can build, you can grow, and you have to be quite intentional about it. And for me, the prioritization comes from impact. So there's certain things that are going to be, it's like the big tanker ship in the ocean. It's going to be slow moving, but when it gets to shore, it's going to have a huge impact. It's got a lot of stuff on there. So figuring out which ones are the heavy, big pieces that need attention, that we need to know now, and we need to kick that off, because it's such a slow moving thing. If you don't kick it off today, by the time you need it, it's going to take you 1 to 4 quarters in order to get that in place. So knowing what's ahead and kicking off those things to get that tanker ship going, that's an important thing that I always think about. Immediately, there are certain tactical things that need to get done. I usually prioritize it with people, humans. How is this impacting our humans, our people? Is this something that is an immediate acute pain? Is this a chronic thing? For us to think about it from that lens and creating that environment. So there are always elements of that. This is the chess part of things, that slow moving tanker, and then the immediate ways that things are impacting our people. So it's a constant back and forth and constant pulling of different levers to assess what's impacting our people today. How can I improve that? How can I lay the foundation for that? And then what are the bigger vision impacting things? What's really interesting is that the operations, business operations and people operations, especially at an early stage, they're really one and the same. because it's so early and it's so young that it's really about creating that environment that fosters, like you said, getting the best out of people, and creating that environment where people want to produce their best, right? And so to me, the business operations and people operations at this early stage, they're really in interchangeable terms and in the focus of the work that I do.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, like you said, at this early stage, a lot of things are connected anyway. A lot of things are just about laying the foundations. Is there anything that you feel particularly proud of having put the foundations in this early already?
I'm proud of the culture. I'm proud of who we are as people to each other, and the thoughtfulness and the intentionality that we have. And that's not something that I take credit for, but I'm proud of that. That's something that we all can take credit for. The people showing up for each other, the level to which we do it, and the authenticity of our intentions, like that to me is something really beautiful to be celebrated about our company so far. Of the things that I'm bringing in intentionally is, there's certain things like, this is the big slow moving tanker versus like, how do I prioritize that immediately? To tie that back is people, the way that I view people to do their best work is when three things align. It's when people's, their own passion aligns with what they're good at. That's something that a lot of people talk about, right? You have to be, when you're good at what you love doing, then it doesn't feel like work. People say that all the time. When you think about in a professional setting and in work, and when you think about retention, and when you think about the long-term vision of a company, those two things are absolutely necessary. But the third part of that, the third leg that I see, is it has to align with the future vision of that person. So it's like, when someone joins the company, they'll come with like, I'm really good at this and I love doing this. And does it align with who I see myself in whatever future time frame? So that's why career mapping is so important, and showing the opportunities that are available within the company is so important. And so career mapping, leveling, having all the stages, and all of that is such an important component to work life. And actually, it's a diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging initiative, which is a whole nother conversation. But mapping that out explicitly as a company is a really, really lofty goal. And it's not something that even, I know a bunch of Series C companies who haven't executed on that yet, and or companies that have been around for 5 years, they haven't gotten around to that yet. But it's a deeply meaningful initiative. But if I were to roll that out now today, that's too heavy of a lift for a startup like us, and it keeps us from being nimble and from being agile. So then I think to myself, what are the atomic units? What are the smallest and simplest things that I can do with that vision in mind for us getting to that eventuality? And for me, getting to the levels and career mapping, it actually ties into performance management. And performance management can be a controversial topic in certain companies, but I have a very specific belief on how performance management isn't about managing someone else's performance, but it's managing someone's expectations of their own performance. So when we have that lens, then the smaller unit of that is feedback. And how do we give feedback to each other? And feedback is a very interesting thing about a company. As humans, we use that word just so easily. We throw it around. We're like, oh, can I get some feedback? Can I give you feedback? But when you think about conflict between people, it is almost often you can boil it down to how some sort of feedback was provided or how it was received. That creates tension, that creates friction. And so when we bring how to give feedback as training inside the company, and we actually surface it explicitly and talk about it as a company, then we have an opportunity to align on what that means. And so one of the early learning and development sessions that we did was how to give feedback. And we defined as a company, what does feedback mean to us? And I love the definition that we came up with, which is it's an opportunity for growth. right? So feedback in our company is an opportunity for growth. So it's not criticism. It's not about telling you what was wrong. It's about, hey, how can you grow? How can I grow? How can we grow? So for me, it's defining that. And then that also then leads to us really ingratiating the culture with trust and with a growth mindset. And that is, we're getting to the smaller and smaller and smaller units. So to me, that is like me playing the checkers and the big game of chess at the same time. Like, I know what's ahead. That's going to take us a year to 2 years, which is still pretty ahead of the game. But in order for us to get there, there are all these steps that we need to get there together. And it's bringing people along to the idea, to the micro ideas that actually collectively create that larger theme.
That's, I would almost say beautiful. Keeping both that big picture, but also the immediate tactical implications of what we have to do tomorrow in mind is extremely challenging. And I'm personally just extremely glad that we have you in the company to think about this stuff, because I don't know where we would be without you. Definitely not as thoughtful about a lot of these people initiatives. I want to hone in on one specific piece you mentioned there. That you have you pose a question on your LinkedIn profile, which is, how do we integrate diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into the company from day one and in every part of our growth, where it's not just a checkbox, a percentage, or a seasonal initiative. Now, I know that the answer to that question can probably fill many hours of interviews. But maybe there's sort of a small taste, or what is the core of your belief around DEIB for you personally?
Personally, for me, it's it ties back to a very specific word, paranoia versus pronoia. I didn't coin this term, and Adam Grant, who is an amazing researcher and is a public figure in organizational structures, he came up with that, and he has a beautiful TED Talk about it. But that word actually speaks to me in a very specific way about DEIB. And the reason is because when we talk about diversity and when we talk about equity and inclusion, oftentimes we don't talk about belonging. But when you don't belong in a space, you could be invited to participate, and you could have all the different people in the room there, and everyone could have access to the same thing. But if you personally don't feel like you belong, you're not going to belong, because your perception of reality is your reality. So if you have a room full of people who have access to the same thing, or you can say access to the same things that everyone else does, and you have all these different people in the room, it's still not going to be the same thing if people don't feel like they belong. And so the idea of pronoia being the opposite of paranoia is that if we can build a culture of people deeply believing the person sitting next to me, the person across from me, and this is all very much figurative and not literal, since we're in 100% distributed company, and that's the future of our work at GraphCDN. Believing that everyone around me is so proactively supporting me and taking care of me, then that is going to foster the feeling of belonging. And when people belong is when people can do their best work. Because when you don't feel like you belong, your cognitive overhead is going to be occupied by certain levels of calculating, or assessing, or being defensive, or deflecting. And so if a human brain, they say that you can only focus on 3 to 5 things at a time, and on average it's 3, and you have to be pretty exceptional to be 5. If you have a part of your focus being about like, oh, well, what's going on there? Well, how am I being treated in that? That means at most we're getting 66% out of people's cognitive overhead. So if we can actually just create that culture of belonging, then we are unlocking the potential of everyone. So to me, DEIB can't be a checkbox. It can't be a statistic. It has to be part of every single thing that we do. And just that deep sense of belonging it can be fostered in so many different ways. Like in a meeting, sometimes what we don't realize is that there's some quiet folks in the room, right? And so just giving space to those people, saying, and when you single quiet people out, it makes them feel uncomfortable. So having that awareness and just giving space to every single person, that just feels like, oh, everyone has a say. So it's something really, really small, but something small as that, and something as big as what we've done with benefits and perks is something else that we're doing as a day one initiative. For a small company, I was describing our company to somebody. I said, we're the mightiest 10-person company you'll ever meet. And so for a company of our size and our stage, what we've done with benefits and perks, and like there's one component of it that speaks to a lot of people, is that a time off for maternity and paternity and family leave. And we called it parental leave. And we've standardized on 16 weeks. And that is for any gender, any background, for any new person entering into your family, no matter what your background, no matter what that structure is. And making that universal allows anyone to feel welcome, like, oh, I don't need to have a conventional family. I don't have to have a conventional birth. It could be an adoption. It could be a surrogate. I still get the same and equal time off as anyone else. And something else that we've done in benefits and perks is to call out caregivers. Because when we talk about the underserved market and we talk about diversity, we often talk about things that are visible. But to me, having that sense of equity and having a sense of belonging is sometimes tapping into those components of ourselves that aren't visible. And there are many of us who are caretakers, whether it's your family members that are elderly or that are young or that might have special needs, whoever they are, or sometimes it's pets, and people, don't think that they're your fur family. So when we think of caretakers as part of the people that we want to make sure that we intentionally take care of, to me, that is a really strong signal that we're sending out to the world about how intentional we are about belonging. And to me, of all the letters in DEIB, the belonging, the B is the most important one.
I love that. And I think that also has a lot to do with the much talked about term psychological safety. In order to belong, you have to feel safe to be at a company, right? And I think that really ties strongly into that. I'm really glad that we settled on the parental time off policy that applies to everyone, because I hope to have kids one day, and I hope I get to enjoy my time with them, right? And ultimately, as a company, I strongly believe that we're only going to win and we're only going to build a great product if we can build a diverse team. Because otherwise, we're just going to sit in an echo chamber of our own ideas. And if you don't bring varied experiences into the company, you're going to build a worse product. So I'm really glad that we're super focused on all of this.
It actually speaks volumes about you and Tim as founders as well. Because there are founders who talk about it, and there are founders who do something about it. And for the two of you to have done something about it, to even say, hey, we want to look for someone to do this, to build and lay the foundation of all of this intentionally with us at such an early stage, that is, it's phenomenal. And not only say those things, but when we build out a benefits package, that at the end of the day, this is a huge impact on our runway. And so we could be thinking metrics only, and you're like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. And we could go with the minimum. But instead, we made a decision with what is most enriching for our people. What is the maximum of our capability, while de-risking the company? Those are really challenging questions and thoughts. And so it speaks volumes about you and Tim as well as founders. So thank you.
I appreciate that. We're trying, I would say.
You're doing.
I'm curious, with all of this in mind, if someone's listening and thinking, maybe one day I want to build a startup, what advice would you give them? I know you also work with Founder Culture, which is a great organization. If you're thinking about starting a startup, you should totally check out founderculture.net. They're a fantastic community of founders there. And you've worked with quite a few, younger tech founders there who are maybe not as experienced in company building. What are maybe the big building blocks that you would focus on for them to get right?
The first thing is get going, get started, right? A lot of people think about it and talk about it, and it's just get going. So the fact that people are thinking about founding a company, I think it's a beautiful thing. Founders are force multipliers in this universe, and doing something that has never been done before. What an amazing journey, and what a scary one. And you need a community, which is why Founder Culture was started. It's a community by founders for founders, and it is just purely for a community of people to be able to share the learnings and the battle scars that everyone has gained through their journey. So the thing that I would say besides get going is also to celebrate. I think that there's a seriousness of the endeavor that feels so big and heavy that we don't always stop to enjoy the small victories and the big milestones. And because there's so many things looming ahead, we don't stop and go, whoa, wait a second, let's enjoy that. So I say enjoy the journey and celebrate the small victories, like however small they are, and just celebrate them. Also because the journey of founding a company, man, at one moment you could be in the highest of highs and the next moment be in the lowest of lows. And sometimes you're vacillating multiple times in a day, and it's so challenging, and it's sometimes very, very lonely. So being able to stop and celebrate the small and big things is really important. The other thing that I would say is that is to come with curiosity, because what you think you know will most likely isn't what you are going to believe in tomorrow or later. And so coming with the curiosity is really, really important. And I see certain founders, there's certain personas of founders, and there's certain personas that come with like, I know this. I've done this, I know this, or this is my product and I've got this. Or they discount how hard the people component is. Like when you think about it, it is not the product that scales. It is the humans that scale the product. It is the humans that scale. The company is comprised of the people, and then there are other assets, right? And so it is when you are building a company, you are building a company of humans. And so there are a lot of founders who underestimate that. So that's another thing. And there are many folks out there who are willing to be mentors, guides, or fractional support. You can get fractional CPOs, chief people officers. There's just a lot of resource out there. So be curious and know that it's a people organization, and don't underestimate how hard that is. So that's my first tip.
That really resonates with me. When people who aren't in startups, friends from high school, ask me what it's like to found a startup, I always say that the thing I tend to underestimate, even though I've done it before, is that it's an emotional roller coaster, right? Like you said, in the same day, you can be at the highest high of your entire life. Everything's going really well. And at the lowest low, everything's really bad. And that just happens. You're oscillating between those states constantly because so many things are happening and so many things are changing. And I think a lot of sort of what I see successful founders doing really well is when things are going really well, they celebrate it, but they also know it's going to get worse. And so they always have a little bit of realism to them. And when it's going really badly, they of course try to fix it, but also they know it's going to go better at some point, right? They even out sort of that emotional roller coaster a little bit, make it a little bit more linear. And you got to celebrate the highs and you got to make sure you fix the lows, but you also got to just keep in mind your progress over time, right? And it's always going to go up. And so that to me is one of the things I always underestimate, how strong that emotional roller coaster just whips you around like nothing. It's thrilling, but it's also scary.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's a roller coaster that you didn't realize that you chose to get on. You're like, wait a second, this isn't exactly what I signed up for, but that's the ride that you're on. Yeah. I think, to add to that, there is there's an element of emotional resiliency that founders can build into the core of who they are, that is very helpful. And one thing that I think about is that the emotional state, it's temporary. It's remembering that this is a temporary state. And when you think about that in terms of how that it is indeed temporary, the saying of "this too shall pass," it does, it will pass, it absolutely passes. So it's important to understand that. And there's a term in psychology called locus of control, and it's how much do you believe that you actually have control in the outcome and the things that are coming in your life. And as founders, you have a lot of control into what happens. You can't control everything, and absolutely there's a sprinkle of fairy dust and luck in there, but there is a lot that you can control. So sometimes, and while it might be temporary, it could be a band-aid, it is helpful to be able to shift your mindset to something that you can control to get that sense of stability back. And so shift the mindset from this situation that feels completely out of control to, okay, of this situation, what are some of the levers that I can pull? What are the buttons that I can push? And figure out those things until you feel that stability again, and then you can look at the big picture. So it's a constant, I call it Google Maps view, zooming in to the turn by turn and zooming out to where you are and what your destination is. And you have to be able to do that. Any good leader would be able to do that. But as founders, that's critical, right? If you are constantly in that turn by turn, it's like, oh, make a left turn here, make a right turn there, left turn there, right turn there. But where are you doing that? Are you doing that on Mars? Or are you doing that on Earth? Are you doing that in the United States? Are you doing it in Germany? Like, where are you doing that? So being able to know, like, oh, we are here and we're trying to get there. That's what the turn by turns are for. So that gives us a deeper sense of control to be able to zoom in and zoom out. And then building that deep sense of trust that you're going to be okay. What is the worst thing that's going to happen? Like, you are going to be okay. And then also being able to lean in on your community. I know it's a lonely journey and I know it feels really hard, but it's not a journey that hasn't been done before on the level of human connection. While the specifics of your situation are unique to you, as a human being, as a journey, there's going to be others who have done it and who have experienced it, that even if you're just calling someone up and be like, man, that was a hard day, lean in on your support group, lean in on the community. And then one other thing is approaching every experience as a learning versus a failure. When you approach a situation, when something doesn't go and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that, and it's a failure, or like, oh, that sucks. Yes, we're all humans and we're going to have moments of that, but the faster that you can turn that around into a learning, like, well, what have we learned? What can we do differently? How can we turn the situation around? Is different than what can I do differently? So approaching every single experience as a learning and the faster you can convert the failure to a learning experience, it is going to give you a deeper sense of control, deeper sense of stability, and allow you to get out of that emotional roller coaster faster. So
I love
a little bit on emotional resiliency there.
I love all of that. One of the things that I'm personally extremely grateful for is that we get to work with some really smart people at Craft City, and both in terms of the people we've hired, but also the investors and advisors we have, and also the friend group we have, right? And we can go to these people and we can be like, look, we're experiencing this thing, right? We're at a low in the emotional roller coaster right now. Something's not going really well. How can we fix this? And usually they come to us and they're like, yeah, I've seen this 15 times. Here's how we solved it that one time. Here's how we solved it that other time, right? Maybe go try this. They bring not just the emotional support, but also just the realism of this happens to everyone, right? It is a unique journey that we're on, but it's also one that other people have walked. Another thing that I love that we do at Craft City is that we provide coaching for everyone. And one thing my coach said at the very beginning of our coaching sessions, she was like, I don't know what this journey is going to be like of coaching you. I do know that I've walked this journey many times. I'm like a mountain guide. I might not have hiked up this specific mountain before, but I've hiked up hundreds of other mountains that are very similar to this. And so whatever happens, we can work together and I can guide you through it. And I love that perspective, right? Of like, yeah, our journey is unique, but still people have gone through similar things. And relying on them, I think, is one of the things I'm most grateful for, because we do rely on them quite a bit, and we do. It just helps to get advice sometimes, right, from people who've been in similar situations. To close us off here, Sue, is there or are there any things that you think people outside of the company don't know about the company that they should know about? Is there anything that sticks out to you as, I know this and everybody else at Graph City knows this, but nobody else knows this, and I really want everybody else to know?
Yes, you just dropped something very casually in your previous comment about coaching for all that is one thing that just actually stands out to me right now. We provide coaching for everyone. Well, what does that mean? A lot of companies, that's mentorship, which is also a beautiful and an important thing. But we actually provide external coaching. We work with an external coaching company and every single person gets to have a coach. And that's a belief that we have as a company, that everyone is a leader. Whether you're in a leadership position or not, you are a leader, because especially at this early stage, you are going to be making decisions that impact the outcome of this company. You make all the micro decisions that we make in a day. It actually impacts how this company is going to grow. So they say that when you point the nose of an airplane, I think this may or may not be true, but if you point the nose in San Francisco, I think a 3-degree difference starting from San Francisco will either get you to New York or Florida. 3 degrees is not very much. But that's how I think about it. So every single person that we bring on in this company, we view as leaders, we view as decision makers. And how can we best support that as a young and early startup? It's to ensure that everyone gets that level of coaching. And when you have that as an internal coaching and mentorship program, it's a very different experience when you have it as an external program. And the reason why I strongly believe in having both is that when you have an external program, you can actually come with a level of vulnerability and sharing that you can't always have with someone who's inside the company, because there is power dynamics, right? You have to think about that, like what is the position and there's a trust. Not that there isn't trust within the company, but there's a different level when you can have someone who has experience and who has the knowledge and who can be your thought partner, but who doesn't have a stake in the game in what it is exactly that you're doing. And so we have coaching for all, and that is an experiment that we're running. And so far, everyone has really embraced it, and every single person has taken on a coach. And I personally believe that that's a very unique thing about our company that is going to pay amazing dividends to all of us later as a company and as people. Something else that people might not know about the company is the level of investment that we have in the people that we believe as humans, as individuals. You talked about the founder promise, I think, and there are components of the founder promise that people might know, but I think it's deeper than that, and it's reflected in the coaching for all. But it's the level of investment that we believe that is required for every single person in order for them to flourish. Like Max, you personally said that having every single person have a very well-established brand, is such an important asset, not just to the company, but to themselves. And so we everyone, I think when people think about retention, it's like, how do we keep everybody here? It's like the golden handcuffs. But we don't view it that way. We're viewing retention as, if we continue to grow and if we continue to elevate the company and ourselves, it is upon us to create an environment where people are like, this is where I can do my best work and I choose to stay. This is where I can show up as my best self and I choose to stay. And so the leadership team here, we view retention so differently than many companies do. And I think that's the small nuanced, differences that is going to have a huge impact. So that's something that we know within the company that I don't think is explicit to folks who are outside of the company.
Well, I am all warm and fuzzy inside now. Thank you for saying all those things.
Virtual hugs.
So you mentioned our future founder promise. And I think for people who don't know what that is, essentially we try to be as transparent as possible internally. And so every person that joins, we strongly believe that if you're a leader, eventually if you have the ambition, you might also want to found your own startup. And so we try to teach you everything we learn basically by being as transparent as we can and by letting you in on everything that's happening so that you can learn through our experience. And if you eventually decide you want to found your own startup, then we're there to support you and we'll happily introduce you to investors. We'll mentor you, we'll help you achieve your dreams, because that's what we do too, right? Like I mentioned, we rely a lot on our advisors and investors and we ask them for advice and they help us a ton. And so we want to do the same thing for people that supported us and that helped us get Graph CDN to the point that it is now. With that in mind, we're hiring across all departments. So if any of this resonated with you, if you feel like this could be a company that you would want to spend some time at, go check out our careers page, graphcdn.io/careers. But also just, if you don't find a role on there that you think suits you, send us an email. Let us know what you do and let us know what your vision of your future self is, what you're really good at and where you want to go next. And let us know how you think that could fit into Graph CDN. And ultimately, if it's not the right timing, then we know you exist and we can reach out once it is. And if it is the right timing, well, maybe it works out right away. So we'd love to hear from you. Like we said, people are the number one thing that make or break Graph CDN. And so we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to work with you and just reach out and let us know. All right. This was our interview with Sue Odio. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, you can reach Sue on Twitter. I'm trying to get her to use Twitter more. Twitter.com/SueAudio. You should go follow her first of all, but second of all, if you have any questions, go ping her. Annoy her on Twitter so she spends some more time there. I am Max Stoiber. I am one of the co-founders of Graph CDN. Twitter.com/MXSDBR. This was a Graph CDN team interview. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you at the next one.